A kid can still feel the energy that someone has around food and around their body. They still get so much information from a reaction towards a piece of cake, even if it's internal, even if it's a sigh. Hello and welcome to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and today we're going to talk about how subliminal food talk messages impact your belief system, relationship with food, and it can be overt messages and it can be kind of subconscious messages. And, I decided to talk about this today because I feel like if you ask women what their mom said about food or weight when she was growing up, a lot of times, so many women that I work with, speak to, who struggle with weight, with eating, all these different things, they might say to themselves, some say that there was an overt messaging that was like food is bad, constant talk about fat and weight and stuff like that. But a lot of them will say, honestly, nothing. And a lot of them will be like, honestly, my mom was really careful about that. But when you ask her what she remembers about food at the table, though, like what she remembers about her eating experience at the tables that she ate at growing up, suddenly there's all of these memories that come flooding back. And that gap where a lot of the women would be like, nothing, overtly was said to me, but yet when you ask her about her eating experience, there are all of these rules and there are all these things that she can name immediately. And you ask yourself, like, if nothing was ever overtly said, then where did all those rules come from? Because the women I speak to and the women that, buy my programs and are, in my retreats and all the things that I work on with women in this way, there are rules, right? There are these internal rules that a lot of these women walk around with, and they can name them immediately, right? They have them running as B-roll in their brain all day. Like, don't have seconds, don't have, don't take that last piece. If I ate something naughty, quote unquote, yesterday, then I can't have it today. Don't go back for seconds. Don't look too excited about food, and there are all these kind of behaviors and these censorship, these internal censorship, that behavioral censorship that these women have with food. And a lot of times, nobody literally sat her down and told her these rules specifically, but they're in you anyway. They're in you, they were in me, they're in her anyway. Because the reason is because no one needs to tell you these things. A lot of times these rules are born out of watching, right? Out of seeing, out of observing body language, out of observing nonverbal things. I worked with a woman once who, I'll just make up a name, I'll call her Dana, and she told me that her mom never once commented overtly, again, on her body or her weight, right? Not one time. And she was so clear about that. I work with women who are very in tune with the fact that maybe the moms or the women in their lives were very critical about their weight. But this woman specifically was like very, very particular about not wanting to make it seem like her mom was that kind of person, right? And this woman, she had thought about it a lot because she wanted to raise her own daughter in a way where her daughter wasn't obsessed with weight and wasn't obsessed about her body and didn't feel self-conscious about her body or her weight. And so she kept trying to look back and figure out, like, okay, so like, what did my mom actually do wrong? Because she didn't actually literally say these things to me about my body and my weight, yet I am so self-conscious about my body and my weight. I struggle with it. I struggle with obsessing over it. I struggle with not letting my weight dictate how I feel about myself or how I move through my life. But when she thought about it, she couldn't find anything obvious, right? There were no comments on her body. She wasn't put on Weight Watchers when she was 11 years old. She wasn't, she couldn't think of any kind of big dramatic moment that she could point to where she was like, yes, that's the moment where I had trauma around my body, where I started to go down that road of hating my body. She couldn't really point to anything, huge like that or dramatic like that. But then she started to remember the smaller things, right? She started to remember her mom sort of having this recoiling and this sort of like internal conversation with herself about eating a slice of cake at a birthday party, right? Like with herself. And she did remember her mom saying, like in a proud of herself way, like, oh, I didn't eat lunch today, or, kind of like acknowledging that she was able to restrain herself and control herself with food. Like it was some kind of win. And, as we got to talking, she remembered a story where she was out to dinner with her parents and her mom said to her dad, like quietly, but, Dana heard this, where she was like, she was observing and sort of pointing out another woman's figure and saying, like, can you imagine letting yourself go like that? Like acknowledging that, or just pointing out and criticizing somebody's body shape, and the thing is it wasn't about Dana's body. It wasn't about her, what she was eating, right? It was about a total stranger. And even though Dana was young, she can't really remember how old she was. She knows she was young, but she remembers it. That made such an imprint, because even though her mom never taught her these types of rules, quote unquote, to her face out loud, like something she had to follow, she didn't have to overtly say it. Dana intuited and interpreted the rules based on how her mom was speaking to herself and how she was speaking about other people while Dana was in the vicinity of these conversations and of these, of these moments, right? And it's really important to, to remember that when we talk about children, we talk about kids, we think that they only take in and internalize what we tell them, but that's so wrong. More than anything, kids are sponges. They're always collecting information. They're always watching tone. They're always watching tension, right? They're watching what gets praised. They're watching what gets judged. They're watching what makes the energy in the room change and shift. And so before a child has language for calories, for dieting, for body image, for restriction, for any of that stuff that, we talk about 24/7 now, and what we put on our, marketing pages to share with people so that we can, offer them something to help them. Before we have any of these words, a kid can still feel the energy that someone has around food and around their body, right? They still get so much information from a reaction towards a piece of cake, even if it's internal, even if it's a sigh, even if it's like an emotion or like a facial expression, right? A child notices that, feels the temperature and the charge underneath that. Even if nobody ever turns to the child directly and says, this is about you, she still learns, oh, this is how bodies get talked about. This is, your body is going to be currency for how people view you in the future, right? This does impact you. This is something that is important for you to care about. So I think about a mom who I'm working with who has told me with complete confidence, such complete confidence, that food is never a big deal at her table now, right? She doesn't talk about rules. She doesn't talk about labels. everyone eats what they want. And, out loud, as she's saying it, that's totally true. But then she also tells me that she waits until her kids go to bed to eat the things she actually wants. As she's telling me how she approaches her day of eating, of how she relates to food, she is, of course, telling me what I just said, which is that like there's no rules. Everyone gets to do what they want. It's flowy, it's free, it's all that stuff. And then she's also telling me that as she's relaying her story of her eating, that she waits until everyone goes to bed to eat what she actually wants, that there's this bag of chips in the cabinet that's quote unquote technically for everyone, but somehow she's the only one that knows it's there, right? So there's this like hiding, there's this secrecy, there's this like hoarding of food where only she knows where it is. And then she goes and eats it, where at dinner she'll be like, I'm not that really hungry, I'm not really interested in eating. And then, an hour later, she's eating the leftovers with the chips that are hidden. She's not necessarily like creating calories and restrictions and all that stuff, but there's this dysfunction around her relationship with her eating rhythm, right? It's almost like she doesn't feel safe or comfortable eating with everyone else. And there's something underneath that makes her feel like she has to hide and be secretive about enjoying food. And so even though her kids may have never heard her say like, this food is bad, they might never heard her like actually criticize food or actually, villainize food for calories or criticize her own body. They have seen her eat one way in front of them, right? And another way when she thinks that no one is paying attention to her. And kids notice that, right? They may not know what I just explained. They may not understand the deeper pattern underneath it or the deeper shame or, lack of trust or dysfunction underneath it, but they file it away as something that's a little off. And they file it away as like, oh, this is what eating looks like, right? They don't know it's off, but they know it's like different. But the way that kids internalize is they're like, oh, but this is what it's supposed to be. This is what eating looks like. This is what it's supposed to be like. And this is what eating in front of people looks like. And apparently those are two different things, because I eat one way in front of people and I eat another way when I'm by myself. And when I'm by myself, it has to be like secret and private, and there's some sort of like charge and energy around it, right? But in public, I'm putting on a persona and I'm going to eat a certain way. And this is how kids learn so much of life, right? So much of life is learned by children this way. A kid doesn't need a lecture, right? They don't need a syllabus and a lecture on how to behave. Usually they behave and they learn how to relate and act in the world based on watching. So for example, like a child doesn't need a lecture on how to treat a waiter. Like they don't need to sit down and be like, be nice and, say thank you and all those different things, and say please and, don't yell at them, right? They don't need a lecture on that, right? They watch how their caregivers, their caretakers talk to the waiter every time they go out to eat. And eventually, if it's done in a respectful manner, they're going to be respectful. If it's done in a way that's, disrespectful and, critical and all those different things, that's how they're going to be. And whatever way that is, that's going to become her normal. That's going to become the normal for you. And food works the same way. The difference is that food and eating is happening every day, multiple times a day for years and years and years and years. And that's a lot of tiny, wordless, nonverbal lessons that you are getting and you're downloading every single day, right? A child doesn't need someone to explain what kind of body is acceptable. Right? She doesn't need that. She just has to watch what bodies get commented on, which ones get praised, which ones get judged, you know, and so even if someone to your face will be like, all bodies matter and all bodies are great and all bodies are great, that's not going to be what she internalizes if the bodies that get praised are, the thin ones and the fit ones, and the bodies that get judged are the bigger ones, right? A child learns by observation, right? A child learns by watching, right? She's not being taught a rule, right? She's collecting different behaviors that she's seeing from the people in her life that she respects and feels like are the people that are the leaders of her life. And that becomes her belief. That becomes her normal. That becomes her template. And so the thing is, like, two kids can sit at the exact same table and learn completely different lessons, right? One kid might watch, her grandma or her mom or her aunt push seconds on everyone with so much joy, push seconds and dessert and, with so much joy, like food is love and food is generosity, food is how we care for each other. There's no comment about like second on the lips, yours on the hips, or like, there's no, defending the decision to have the dessert, right? But another kid at the same table, might be watching her mom wave off those seconds and touch her belly and make an excuse as to how she has to fit into a dress in 2 weeks, right? Like that's, that kid is getting that message. The other kid is getting the message of real freedom, right? But it's the same meal, the same room, same plate of food being offered. Two completely different experiences, two completely different lessons that the kid is going to take with them. Because kids don't learn from just the content that's in front of them. They don't learn from just what happens. They learn from who they're watching while it happens.
You've built a good life. From the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You eat clean, you work hard, you take care of everyone. But there's this one area that still feels impossible to master, and that is food. You can eat perfectly all day and still end up in the kitchen at night wondering why you keep doing this. You promise yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and I know you mean it every single time. But the cycle, it always finds its way back, especially when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, or when you're just tired of being the one that's holding it all together. And I get it because I lived that way for years. And what I learned is this: the problem, it was never about food. It was the pressure underneath it, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the part of me that never felt safe and secure to just be me. And that's why I created the sober eating sequence. It's a proven 3-phase method that rewires the emotional patterns and the belief systems driving overeating so you can relax, trust yourself around food, and release weight completely naturally, without force and without obsession. Because when your body feels secure, it lets go. The cravings quiet, the self-punishment, it softens, and food, it stops being the thing that you have to fix. This is not another plan. This isn't another rule book. It's a revolutionary transformation for your nervous system, for your body, and for your identity. So join the sober eating movement today.
So I don't think that to get to the answer of like how to create a healthy relationship with food for your kids, it's not about like, did I ever say anything harmful to my kid about food or her body? Right? A lot of women can answer honestly and say, no, I really did. I didn't. I never criticized. I never criticized my kid. I never, I went out of my way to not get on her case about eating, too many calories. And I 100% believe them. But that doesn't mean that the child and their child is not picking up those rules anyway. right? Because the better question that you want to ask yourself is, what has my child watched happen around food? Right? What have they seen me behaviorally, energetically, non-verbally do? Right? What does my face do when dessert shows up? Right? What do I say about other women's bodies when I think it doesn't matter because I'm not talking about her body? I'm just, stream of consciousness talking about what I'm observing. How do you eat when people are watching? Right? How do you eat when you think no one's watching? Because your child is paying attention either way. And sometimes, oftentimes, she's not even watching the thing you think she's watching. Like a lot of times, food will come to the table and parents think that their kid is like looking at the food and getting into their food and tunnel vision and all that stuff, but really they're observing how you are behaving and relating and reacting and responding towards the food. So if you've spent a lot of energy and so many of the women, I can't tell you, I'd say like 80% of the women that I work with, one of the biggest goals and motivations for doing the work with me is because they want to create a healthier environment and relationship with food so that their children can have a healthy one as well. If you've spent a lot of energy worrying about this and worrying about, the exact words that you are using, I understand words definitely matter, but I don't think that the words are the most important vehicle for the lesson, right? It's not the most important vehicle for the lesson. It's the attitude that's being emitted. It's the nonverbal reactions, like, the kind of nonverbal anxiety and negotiation about having dessert, the defending, the sly comments, all the examples that I gave earlier. It's more that, right? It's the hiding, right? It's the having to be like, no, not hungry now, but then like, scarfing down later in secret, right? It's being two different people, right? It's being one person in one setting and another person in what you think would be a more private setting, right? Children need consistency, and that's the most important thing, right? Consistency and the modeling of freedom, the modeling of acceptance and okayness and ease, right? Because your child is not really reading like a handbook or a transcript of what's going on at the table, right? She's reading the room. She's reading your energy. She's reading the energy of people the whole time. And she still is, right? That's what humans are. At the end of the day, we learn and we intuit so much more from the nonverbal energetics of things than we do from words a lot of times, right? And tapping into that's super important. And children are the most astute at that because they're so pure and they're so like, their bodies and their brains and everything is just so wide open to these just nonverbal energies. And so that's why it's so important that we focus on how we are behaving and how we are reacting and responding and what our children are really absorbing energetically. Okay? So that is all I have today. If you want to do deeper work with me in this area, if you're interested in learning about how to understand some of these patterns, these deep-rooted patterns, and learn how to re-pattern them, rewire them, reprogram them, and create new ones, I invite you to join me in either the Invisible Weight Detox, it's an entry point into my sober eating method, or the full, complete sober eating sequence. That is an amazing, amazing program that takes you through 3 different phases, to create an experience within yourself so that you can be the best version of yourself and really find freedom with food, lose weight, all that good stuff, and just create the conditions for your children to just be so well adjusted around food and body image. There's also opportunities to work with me one-on-one. You can find all that on the website. And of course, if you are enjoying the podcast, please follow us on Spotify, on Apple, on YouTube. If you are a video podcast watcher, please rate us 5 stars, subscribe, leave us a written review if that is your jam. Love those. And share this episode with anyone that you feel might benefit from it. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.